Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. So thank you again to IT Services and to Library Services for hosting this event. We're glad you can join us for the second session with Dr. Dan Alasso. So Dr. Dan Alasso received a master's in Latin American history from Minnesota State University, Mankato in 2007, and a PhD in history from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst in 2017. Since 2017, Dan has been an assistant professor of history at Bemidji State University, where he has converted all but one of his classes to zero textbook cost. Dan has participated in several Minnesota State OER learning circles, in which he has authored 4 open textbooks. In spring 2023, Dan received a grant to explore implementing a Z degree in a university setting, and that's what we'll be talking about at this session. We are recording this, and we will be making that available along with the slides after our presentation. So I'll let Dan take it away.
Okay, thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks again for having me here. So I have been, since I've been kind of involved in OER, I've also just coincidentally been kind of talking to the system office about this stuff as well. And I joined early on, I joined the Tech Council and the Textbook Affordability Committee, and I would go to the CAT meetings on campus and stuff because I was really kind of interested in technology. Between my, as you can see, I'm very old. Between my undergraduate career and my graduate career, I had an entire career mostly in high tech. I worked in the Twin Cities mostly, and I was in the PC business. I was in commercial and industrial distribution. I was a systems engineer for Silicon Graphics when we were in the Cray research facility in Eagan just before they. So it was interesting, and I really kind of enjoyed being the disruptor. Rather than the disrupted. Now I'm the disrupted, so I guess it was my turn. But in any case, I had that whole thing. So I was interested in technology and ways that we might use technology, to sort of do more with students, and in new and interesting ways and stuff like that. So I got involved in the Tech Council. I chaired it last year. And so I've had a lot of opportunities to work with people at the system office, Tim Anderson, Kim Lynch, and and then when Tim moved on, Michael Olson, and as well as participating with Karen at Central Lakes in learning circles and stuff. So in 2019, when the first legislation happened, I read it and and it said colleges, and I immediately called them up and I said, do you mean colleges or do you mean colleges and universities? And at the time it was still Tim Anderson, and he said, we're gonna interpret that to mean colleges because it's easier to do in a 60 credit associate's degree with no textbook cost. And also because it was primarily the 2-year Students Association, Lead MN, not Students United, that was behind the legislation. So they passed this legislation, they applied it to the community colleges, and the point of it is that a student should be able to find a path from matriculation to graduation without buying a textbook. And that doesn't mean that every possible course they would take would be textbook cost free, or course materials, more largely described, free, but that there is a way to get through a program. And that's the way the goal was defined. And so they started awarding people at the community colleges these grants, first to explore and then to implement and then later to maintain Z degree programs. And the ones that did it, I think Central Lakes was really first. And then hard on their heels, Anoka Ramsey, Century, Lake Superior, Minneapolis College, Minnesota State Community and Technical College, Minnesota North, Minnesota West Community and Technical, Northland, and St. Cloud Technical and Community College. I think that's 10, right? There were 11, but there's been some consolidation since then. And then there are 8 more institutions that are involved in developing or in the exploration phase. And those are Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, Inver Hills, Minnesota State Moorhead, St. Cloud State, St. Paul College, Rochester Community and Technical College, Normandale, and BSU. And so I got I didn't realize that Moorhead had got it. I thought it was just us and St. Cloud. And St. Cloud was, I think, a year ahead of us. But they haven't been able to move on to the implementation phase yet because of their own issues. And so I thought that was giving us kind of an inside track to compete, because I since this began, I've been saying, well, at least we want to be a destination for these people who are getting associate's degrees without having paid for textbooks and might want to go on and continue to a bachelor's degree and certainly don't want to start paying for textbooks, right? So we'll say, hey, we might not be a Z degree school, but we're doing as much as we can. And then this last year, they opened it up. And I got, in spring 2023, I got a exploration grant. So I started exploring. And some of the things that I found are that there are a bunch of different kind of constituencies that are interested in reducing textbook cost, and they have different perspectives and they have different kind of interests and priorities. And so kind of the name of the game is, if not reconciling all of those things, at least, creating a consensus. And, I mentioned earlier in the earlier session that I've been spending a lot of time with my history students working on primary sources. One of the things, and a lot of those primary sources have been kind of from a Native perspective. And one of the cool things about that Native perspective, and this was something that Graeber and Wengrow brought out in their, highlighted in their book last year, Dawn of Everything, that they had a different view of what individual rights meant, and all these things that we tend to think, are sort of part of the Enlightenment, that we thought maybe were created by French philosophes. Well, it turns out they weren't. They were created by Hurons. In any case, a big part of this, and one of the things that I've been working with my students with, has been the idea of consensus rather than democracy, right? Where democracy is like 50% plus one, and you win, and everybody else, tough shit, right? Whereas, consensus, you have to sit at a table and come to consensus. So that's kind of the way I've been thinking about this. So from the student perspective, as I had mentioned earlier, they're a different population at Minnesota State than at other schools, right? They're much more likely to be first generation. And as I said, at BSU, it's more than 50% of our students are first generation. So there's no experience in the family to say, this is the culture of higher ed. This is how you do it. This is how you get a textbook, right? Without just going to the bookstore and paying the top price, right? They're more likely to be working. They're more likely to even full-time, I have so many students who are working full-time. Right? And their reactions, as I mentioned in the previous session, are very similar to the reactions of the people who are surveyed on a national level. And when I surveyed them at BSU, one of the students said, they've really set the value of textbooks at an incredibly unreasonable cost. A textbook that's worthless to me is charged at $300 because they'll know I will have to cough it up and get the new version for my class. And that keeps those publishers sitting on way more money than the labor they put into it could possibly be worth. And then he went on to say, but the universities are the ones buying them in the first place, so they must get a significant cut. As if, I wish we were, but not true. But that was kind of a student perspective, and it wasn't that unusual. It wasn't that unlike some of the other ones. So students have put, especially as I said, Lead Minnesota, even more so than Students United, have put a lot of pressure on their families, and together they have put a lot of pressure on the legislature, which I will get back to shortly. But the original Z-degree legislation was really the result of this lobbying by Lead MN. So, and that's great because it focused a lot of attention on the issue, and it made something happen, which a less kind of aggressively in your face approach might not have been able to do. So we have them to thank for that. And this is kind of a repetition. Pretty much, I'll just blast through this because I think just about everybody who was at the first one has seen this. So the things that I mentioned, the respondents who said, about 2/3 of them said that they had avoided buying a textbook. Right. And then there was, I think, Heidi, it might have been your question, probably 70 or 80% also said, yeah, I was so frustrated when I bought a textbook. I spent all that money and then we didn't even crack it open. Right? And then it was, it wasn't even really used. It was just on the syllabus because it had been on the syllabus in years previous or whatever. And so that is, there's a lot of frustration in that, right? And there should be. And I think that if, and this is the one area really that we can change, right? Where we don't have a lot of impact as faculty, we don't have a lot of impact on these other areas. And I did mention last time that, that the national average is $1,240 to $1,440 per year on textbooks and course materials per student. So I went with a round number of $1,250, which I will come back to with some illustrations, because that's an important number, and $5,000 a year in textbooks. In a lot of cases, students also in these surveys were reporting that, and you want to take this, of course, with a little bit of a grain of salt, but people were saying, I've had to choose between groceries and the textbook at the beginning of the semester. Right. And I think that probably to some extent that there is some reality there. Now, as I mentioned last time, faculty have been sensitive to this and have been responding to this, right, with a lot of different techniques. And we also, as we also talked about last time, the weird kind of siloed nature of this is a little bit concerning, right? When I decided, when I heard early in the spring semester, actually it might have even been between fall and spring, that the system office was going to open up the exploratory grants to universities, I kind of jumped on that. But as I was sort of finishing up the application, I heard that there were a couple of people in the library who were, were asking questions about it, and, had called in to the system office, and they said, oh, Dan's working on that already. It's like, why weren't we already talking? And these were people I knew, right? This was Patrick Leaport, who I, have talked to a lot about OER because he got a PhD in OER basically. So yeah, so there's a little bit too much of that going on. There are also faculty concerns, right? I mentioned previously, sort of concerns about quality and things like that have probably pretty much been addressed, or they've been much better addressed than they had been a couple of years ago when I started talking to people about this. There are some other concerns as well. There are a lot of faculty concerns about kind of the musts that were included in that original legislation in 2019, right? That had been written mostly under the impetus of the students. There was a passage in their paragraph, a clause that said faculty must evaluate open textbooks for potential adoption. And I don't know what the faculty, what the bargaining unit at the two-year school said, but the IFO said, hold on, my union said that's kind of problematic in terms of not only academic freedom, but also as kind of an unfunded mandate. Oh, when will we be evaluating these things? How is that going to happen? So, although it's definitely something that should happen, faculty should want to, right? But, but we should, hopefully we'll find a way to sell it to them rather than kind of force it on them. So as that thing was kind of going through the legislative process, one of our guys from St. Paul, I think it was Jonathan Bone, got involved and helped kind of finesse some of those issues. And apparently there was another issue where a textbook publisher, a commercial textbook publisher, had been trying to sneak in inclusive access as a form of open textbook, which it's not. You may not pay for this particular textbook for this particular class, but if you're paying $120 a year or a semester for access, then it's certainly not free. So, so there was some of that type of thing. When we did survey faculty, I mentioned this one about quality earlier. Another professor at BSU said, something about academic production, right? We write papers, we write articles, write monographs or textbooks, and all these things count, right? Partially because they just count, partially also because they have editorial review and peer review, right? And these, and they're sort of accepted as legitimate academic production. And then they were also concerned about how their intellectual property rights are affected by producing OER that could be freely reused or remixed or adapted. Right? And so that one person said, the possibility of my work being modified by others without my permission or not being properly cited, etc., makes me leery of getting involved in an OER project. And I can understand the concern. Even Creative Commons requires attribution. So it's an issue of kind of dialogue and communication. And then another one said, well, it was a PDF that was 1,100 pages long and it took so long to load and all that, right? So again, I won't belabor this because we've seen this before. I was thinking if there was a whole bunch of other people here who hadn't seen it, I would just kind of review this. From the administrative perspective, I think, in my experience, administrators have been keenly aware that OER could lower student cost and that would aid in retention and probably facilitate, and student success, right? Because people wouldn't be failing or getting worse grades because they hadn't bought the textbook. And probably that would also be an aid in recruitment, right? And especially right now at the universities, if we can say, hey, all you people who are getting Z degrees at community colleges, we got something for you, right? We're ready. We're getting ready for you if we're not ready for you. I mean, there are a couple of schools, which we mentioned earlier, where, or at least in the break, we talked about where tuition covers books, like UW Stout, right? That's why they do the eFordability Summit every year, right? Because their bookstore or their library actually is involved in providing these textbooks for the students. So Bob Butterfield is very well, he is acutely aware that every penny they save on those textbook costs, because the university is paying for them, that just drops right to their bottom line, right? So that is a direct impact. So huge incentive. So for other people like us, the savings accrues to the students, and it's kind of hard to quantify. We could probably try harder. We could probably do a better job of quantifying it, and that would probably help us better make the case that, this was the situation in 2023, and, the new situation in 2025 is this much better. Right? And we're definitely going to need to do that, as, we have to go back to the legislature and say, see, that $1 million you spent, bought us, $10 million in savings or whatever. One of the administrators that I surveyed said the main challenge that they saw with OER was helping faculty find the time to do it. In addition to all the other things that they have to do and that they may want to do, that may be higher in their estimation on their priority list of things they want to do for the students. And administrators are aware that the Min-State system does provide a lot of resources, but they're also aware that it takes time to make those things happen. Right? And so, and this particular administrator is one of the deans, who's no longer there, unfortunately, said that she was very much aware that although this right now, at the time that I was surveying them, was a selling point, it was a nice to have for students. At some point in the really, really not too distant future, which is now our present, it was going to become a need to have, right? It was going to become an expectation of students that they are aware that there are zero textbook cost options for them in the system. And so we need to do something about it. Right? So it's a system-wide thing, but it's also, of course, a campus by campus kind of a competitive situation. Or at least to the extent that students understand that they have a choice of at what campus they're enrolling in courses. Another administrator said quality and coverage are important. Who reviewed the content? Is it accurate? Are there examples given? How good are the examples and the quizzes and the study guides? Are the sample problems correct? And are the solutions free of mistakes? And then this person also said, it's nice to know that other people are doing stuff. She said, if I have 3 colleagues who use the same textbook that I'm considering, I have a sense of security. I have confidence that the textbook meets that quality standard. And that saves time. Right? So it's not as much of a feeling of going out on a limb. Now, I guess I would say that those are the same questions that you have about any textbook adoption, right? So actually in my book, that's kind of a win, right? If open textbooks will be judged, along the same criteria as any other, right? So, and there are, as I said, there are plenty of examples within the state system of people using an open textbook in just about any course, in just about any field, right? So that's another thing that has to happen is somebody's got to run around and pull all that information together and be, so that we can say, oh yeah, you're teaching Chem 2. They're doing it over there with the OpenStax book and it's working fine, right? Or they have the OpenStax books, the book, and they've developed a set of ancillaries, right, that they've put in Opendora, right? So it's available to you as well. That's just kind of an issue of raising awareness, which I shouldn't trivialize, but I mean, it's possible. It can happen. And then one of the things that was a surprise to me was bookstores. When I first went to the BSU bookstore, which is Follett, I thought I was, dropping into enemy territory, right? Parachuting behind the lines, because I went in and I looked at the stacks and and the prices and all that. And I was like, oh my God. And the manager came and he said, and I was like taking some notes about, what things were costing. He said, I got a spreadsheet. Would you like it? I said, yeah, hell yeah. And so, I mean, he was very cooperative, very interested in students not paying any more than they needed to. Right now, granted, he was a little bit brainwashed by, textbook sales reps and by, Follett management saying, inclusive access is good and, and this is the way we're going to solve this problem for students. But, that's just kind of an honest difference of information. That's not, it's not impossible to have a conversation about, how, maybe that is a little bit of a walled garden and, might not be everything that they think it is. I mean, it takes a little bit of time, but, once we don't see them as the enemy and they don't see us as the enemy, that can happen as well. And that's a great place to start, at least, and try. And if that doesn't work, then, if you can't get the information through conversation, you can get it indirectly because they have to report it all to the administration anyway. So, so how many books are sold at what price is all reported. So we can use that to understand where there are points that we can apply pressure to reduce cost, and where really we can get the most return for our efforts. And that is a big piece of, I think, developing a Z degree program, is figuring out where the pressure points are, because we want to show results, right? So we want to find high enrollment courses with expensive textbooks that we can apply a solution to. Librarians, okay, preaching to the choir here. So library faculty have been, probably aware of this in more detail and for longer than most instructors have. So, they're either, great allies for faculty who figure it out, or, if there aren't any of those kind of faculty, then, they can lead the charge themselves. My friend Patrick, the librarian at BSU, who I have talked to about this, but I just wasn't aware that he was, thinking about applying for the exploration grant that I had just finished applying for. He said discovery is something that libraries and librarians are always kind of concerning themselves with, and that's no different in OER. And he said he's seen a lot of survey articles, and as I said, he just got his PhD in basically OER, where faculty looking to find OER are struggling to find appropriate materials, and that's something that that he thinks he has a leg up in helping them do. And then he also said, and this kind of goes to really some of the questions about things like quality matters and accessibility and stuff. That, one of the things that librarians can help to do is raise awareness about those issues, and also other benefits of the 5Rs that go beyond just kind of simple cost reduction, right? Because reusing and retaining and remixing and the other two are also about sort of flexibility and customization for faculty. So that's I think very helpful, very useful. So the legislature and kind of the general public, they have definitely been feeling pressure about education expense. And this, again, they are aware that this is an area that they can actually address, and where not so easy to appropriate more state money and reduce tuition or fees or something like that. And this actually comes out of somebody else's pocket anyway, right? So it's if it's a net loss to the textbook manufacturer industry, that's not really our issue. So they felt a lot of pressure from their voting constituents to reduce costs. So the 2019 Z-degree bill, which was a Senate bill 699, it had 2 Republican sponsors and 1 Democrat. Now, as I mentioned, there were a bunch of statements of requirement, must statements, that didn't really sit that well with some faculty. And especially that unfunded mandate of you must review OERs for possible adoption. And then the other kind of crazy inclusive access thing didn't last that long. Now, the new news is that in the latest session, apparently, another $1 million was allocated to create a Z-degree transfer pathway from the 10 or 11 community colleges, 10 community colleges, 11 campuses that already have the associate's degree, to providing a bachelor's degree at a university that will be thought of as a 60 credit completer. So the idea is that this sort of assumes, in the same way that the original Z degree at the community colleges was a path through the program without textbook cost, and not a guarantee that no course would have any textbook cost. This completer program assumes that people took care of their associate degree requirements already. Right, so the things that we would focus on in implementing a Z degree at a university would be the major courses. Right? And so that would be the charge if we, that's what I was exploring, was finding enough major courses so I could say, we can chart a path through. I mean, history was going to be easy because all my courses were, all but one was zero textbook cost, and the other 2 guys had started going in that direction as well. The guy that I handed off Modern World to was using my textbook. So there was going to be that. There was going to be, obviously, the liberal studies degree would be one that we could kind of thread a path through. Special ed has just revised their whole curriculum, and they figured, what the heck, while they're doing it, they might as well make it zero textbook cost. So there was that. So we were going to have, I was looking at being able to sort of say that, when I went up for the implementation grant proposal, which I think is due in January, they pushed it back. It promised me it was going to be sooner, but no matter. That I was going to be able to say, we've got, at least 3 or 4 boxes checked where we could implement it kind of day one. And that is, that's up in the air now, but I think that is probably, the type of thing that needs to happen. And I think that I wanted to kind of stop here, and I got some numbers up here, and say that although I am happy that there is a Z degree and that there's talk about, a Z degree as a destination for kind of reducing student textbook costs to zero, I don't think that's really where it's at. Ultimately, I think that, we've got, say we implement a couple of Z degree bachelor's programs and a couple of, say 100 students go through them, get a bachelor's degree with no textbook costs, save $1,250 a year, right? So times 100, that's $125,000 of savings, right? That certainly pays for the program implementation, but say because we can create all the courses we're going to create to make that happen, right? All students will pay less. All the students who take those courses, even if they're not in that sequence toward that major, right, will pay less because they won't be paying for textbooks in those courses. Right? So say we can reduce textbook costs by just 20% for all the students. You guys have 15,000 students. That's $3.75 million. If you're going from $1,250 to $1,000 per student per year. So that's a whole lot of leverage. And, in the system, we have like 300,000 students a year. If we save them only 10% system-wide, that would be just $125 each, right? But over 300,000 students, that's $37.5 million a year. So I think that's something to kind of think about. And the system office, I want to talk a little bit about the system. The system office, of course, has been a huge part in this process of advancing OER, right? They've been doing the learning circles forever. Stephen Kelly has been doing when he was doing those innovation and collaboration grants, which are now changing somehow, but they're still happening, right? And this, in addition to this $1 million that's going to be directed towards this Z degree transfer pathway, there's still some money left in the original kitty, right? So this year there will be two in this January opening, February 2nd closing, March 1st award announcement this academic year. There will be two exploratory grants for $25,000. There'll be two implementation grants for $100 and two sustaining or advancing grants for $25. So $300,000 in all will be spent. So the system office has been doing a lot. They've also, of course, the OTP grant that they're kind of working on now. They're providing 5, I think it is, courses in, completely textbook cost-free teacher training courses in the system, as well as other kind of federal, state, and even private foundation grant potentials. So they also host Open Dora, of course, which is the one of the, I guess you have your own, but it's the repository that the rest of us are using for stashing our open materials. In the future, I would like to see this coordination kind of extended to providing support in areas like instructional design, right? Quality matters, universal design language, accessibility, cultural sensitivity and inclusion. And especially because I think that there's a lot of leverage there. And I think there's a lot of expertise that instructional designers, I mean, I was trained as a subject matter expert. So although my parents were both high school teachers, so I guess I absorbed a little pedagogy by osmosis. I never studied pedagogy, so I've had to, like, that's been another one of my, like, quick, better learn some pedagogy. Better read some books. So I think that would be an area where, a lot of, which is not to say I want to absolve faculty from, being concerned about this, but people do well when they kind of work in their specialties a little bit as well. So, content creators create good content. And I have worked with some, writing collaborations. The one with Tom at SMSU, talked with some people at Winona, was thinking about trying to bring more co-authors into the modern world history and into other projects. And as I was doing that, it kind of occurred to me that, if the system office was going to support that by way of, an innovation grant or a collaboration grant or something like that, then surely, I thought, they would probably have some type of proprietary interest in seeing it used, right? We have modern world history on the books at every university. It's on the books at every community college, even though it may not be taught every year, right? So, so there might be some, without dictating to people and and violating their academic freedom, there might be some ways to create incentives for people to think about taking advantage of some of these resources that people are making, and if nothing else, just kind of breaking the silos that we've all been kind of walled off into, which surprises me a little bit. I have to say, I'm a little bit surprised to find myself coming to the conclusion that that more collaboration would be, because I've always sort of thought of myself as a loner, as kind of an individual contributor. That was a polite word for kind of solipsist in the sales world, right? So, but the types of synergies that we might be able to get through, kind of applying intelligently these opportunities we have with the system would be potentially valuable. Not only coordination, but collaboration. We can't all just reinvent the wheel and make the same mistakes. To some extent, it's good to make mistakes and to gain experience, but if you can learn from people who've gone there before you, then that's good. So, as I was thinking about this, as I pulled up this map to kind of put it up here, it occurred to me that there are probably things happening, at each of these different points on the map, and that somebody needs to kind of run around and find them all and visit with people, and not only to talk to new people who are just beginning to think about it, but also to kind of collect what has been done and celebrate it, and and communicate it to and keep those channels open between students and faculty and administration, and then kind of the general public. It is so in conclusion, it's a good thing that I like cats, because this is very much like herding cats. So I'm a cat person. I do think that although each of these groups do have their own kind of goals and interests and concerns and anxieties, right, that we should be able to kind of coax them into finding ways, finding areas that they can cooperate on, finding areas of overlap, and improving collaboration. So that's my Z degree story. There do seem to be some comments in the chat.
We have one question, just remind us who your colleague was that has their PhD and almost PhD in OER practically.
Oh, Patrick Leaport.
Patrick Lee.
I think he just got it. He's got his PhD, and I think it was in something that basically was OER. I mean, I don't know that's the title of his dissertation, but I think that's pretty much what it's about.
There are new degree programs, particularly in Canada, advanced degree programs in open educational studies.
Cool. Yeah. Well, and you know, it's funny because Canada is, you know, in some ways Canada is just so advanced in this. When you think about, you know, when you think about OER, when I think about OER, I think about BC campus, right? And you know, and that's where Rajiv
is from.
Jangiani is from, and although he's not there anymore, and they're not huge, right? I mean, Min State is huge. We're second only to SUNY, I believe, in the United States in terms of the size of the system and the number of people we serve. So, you know, but what BC Campus did was they not only worked really hard at it, but they said, we are BC Campus, we do OER. We are BC Campus, we do OER. You know, and that was their mantra. And, you know, and now they're known globally for that. So, yeah.
And there's a comment from Joe about
Oh, hi, Joe.
not just the money saved, it's also about democratizing access to learning.
Mm-hmm.
So very much. We talk about, Carrie has talked about open pedagogy. You know, a lot. So if you have questions on that, ask her.
Yeah, and that, you know, it's kind of funny because, you know, when I told my little story of, you know, kind of how I got into this at the previous session, it very much went kind of concurrent with, you know, sort of exploring more open and more kind of democratic ways of, you know, of getting content out there to people. And one of the things, you know, like I said, I self-published my YA novel while I was here as a grad student. I've always wanted to have, you know, sort of everything I do be available out in the world. You know, obviously the thing that we have going for us at accredited institutions is that we have the accreditation. We have the gun to students' head who says, you know, you don't get the 3 credits unless you do it this way with us. And there are some, you know, obviously there are some differences in outcomes and assessments and things like that that you know, that are real, as well as just being, you know, kind of extortionary. But that is something that I think about when I think about how higher ed is changing. Is it, you know, I mean, MIT OpenCourseWare, you know, kind of started it, right? And, you know, you can listen to the Feynman lectures online. So that's interesting.
I'm not super versed in this subject, so forgive me if this is well known, but can you tell me, is there like measurable research saying that Z degrees contribute to retention, contribute to closing equity gaps, all that, or is it too new?
I think I think you can infer that, but I don't know that the questions have been asked in specifically those ways yet, although they're probably beginning to be, right? That, you know, the survey that I did, you know, a couple of years ago that said, you know, that 59% of the students, you know, hadn't bought a textbook. I didn't ask those students any question about their gender, race, you know, even socioeconomic condition, right? I think that, you know, if you I think that correlates with, you know, when you look at who your student population is, you know, I think that you can probably make some intelligent guesses, and we can start asking those questions. I think. I mean, I don't know what you could get away with asking. You know, I did one time run afoul of an IRB So,
Students in a course, so you have their tech IDs, you could have the institutional run the demographics on the IDs that keeps it anonymous to you, but
yeah, but then I can only use it for the purposes of the course. I can't actually say, the type of things that I've just said.
They've done a lot of inferential work because there is some empirical work that shows OER it lowers the rates of DFWs.
Yeah.
Particularly for Pell Grant students.
Okay.
Who
Oh, there you go.
know are
Yeah.
part of these
Mhm.
low socioeconomic groups, so you can kind of make some leaps
Okay.
that it does have an impact, but again, we're not asking it in that language.
Right. Yeah, it would be good if I think it would be helpful to us if someone did, because there's a lot of energy that could be put behind closing equity gaps. I mean, even in our system, in the system with Equity 2030. Chris.
I'm wondering if based on your study of what's going on in the system, like what are the most likely programs to see this type of transition at the community colleges? They're the ones who appear to have done more work. Are these more vocational programs? Are they liberal arts style programs? Because if you think about, the big picture of like Bemidji or Minnesota State Mankato, you'd probably want to start with the areas that you think had the most likelihood of being able to move in that direction. And I'm not exactly sure that I could answer that question, of programs or areas that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that off the top of my head I could either. I think that it is, that's the question that we should be addressing. And that was kind of what I was sort of planning on doing in this exploration prior to the implementation thing was go around to, at least in northern Minnesota, to Northland and the other Minnesota North, right? And ask, what it is specifically that they're getting the most, the best results.
Yeah, I mean, if they're getting it in welding,
Uh-huh.
that's awesome, for that degree program, but it's gonna be harder for a university to necessarily see what that transfer opportunity looks like. I think so. I don't know.
Yeah. So this, I don't know if everyone has seen this. This is the course selector, and the best news that I got when I came here, which is sort of adjacent to what you were talking about, because we can use tools like this to maybe help find this out. In the colleges, there was a lot of controversy about this. In the colleges, there is in the expanded advanced search, there is a textbook cost field. And they have been working on this and they've been arguing about this for years. They implemented it at the colleges because they had to, because you can't get obviously you can't get a Z degree if you can't figure out what courses don't have textbook costs. And I have been telling them at the system office that if we're going to do this at the university level, we're going to need this. And my union has been pushing back on it, and it's been like anathema. And you have solved the problem for us. So you're going to implement it in the fall. As at least a zero textbook cost option. This field will be implemented, maybe a low.
We'll see.
Yeah. And so that is huge. I honestly thought I was going to have to go to all the student senate presidents at all the campuses and say, there's nobody in the world that can stop you from doing this. Even if the union doesn't let us do it, right? All you need to do is compile this information and publish it to the world. But I agree with you. If one domino falls, they all fall. And if maybe there'll be I hope there isn't a challenge from the IFO on this. The fear is that it somehow infringes on academic freedom. It puts too much pressure on the faculty that doesn't want to change, that likes their expensive textbook. I don't, I guess it could be uncomfortable, but students have a right to know, and actually, and legally, they have a right to know. So I was talking to my dean and my provost about this a couple of weeks ago, and the provost said, "Yeah, it's in the 1965 law," and he sent it to me. And I was like, "What are we arguing about then?" So yeah, so this is happening, and it's good, and I think it will. I mean, there are going to be challenges, as Z degree programs at universities are going to cause problems, right? Another of the problems that it will cause, which we don't have necessarily an answer for yet, is that it's a 60 credit completer, right? So, so you're going to get students coming in from community colleges who are going to say, I want to continue, right? But you're also going to get freshmen looking over and say, wait a minute, I want that. Why don't I get that? And I think in the long run, the answer will be, yes, you do get that, right? In the short run, it could be uncomfortable because we're going to say, well, what we've done, what we've implemented to get this at all is we've looked at the major courses in this track, right? And we've put our emphasis, we've put faculty development money, we've put, stipends behind, adopting or adapting or authoring, materials that people can use, or using library resources, or whatever combination of things. Our library is talking about buying textbooks, as an interim kind of a thing. And actually our technology, art, and design department donated a bunch of textbooks. They bought, a whole set for one of their main classes, their required classes, and just gave them to them. And the library is basically the rental office, just gives them out and takes them back and all that, and manages that process. But in the meantime, freshmen are going to come in and say, well, I don't want to pay for textbooks. And we're going to have to say, well, freshman comp they don't have it yet. Right? Maybe there'll be some incentive for freshman comp to get it quick when the student turns around and says, okay, I'll take freshman comp at Central Lakes. So I think that this is, and that's something that maybe I shouldn't have even said out loud, right? Because, that could be a problem in the short run. And it could be the type of thing that causes people to sort of dig in their heels and say, oh, damn it. But, we need to get past that. And, and in the long run, I think it's a net gain for the entire system. So hopefully we can tell that story in an adequate way that people will at least, give us the benefit of the doubt on that, questions like that.
We're running up out of time, but go ahead, Pat.
So in the introduction, excuse me, in your introductory blurb, it says you've converted all your courses but one to be a 0. Is there technical difficulties for that last one, or time constraints, or impossible to convert?
Yeah, it's an elective that I don't teach very often, and it's women in history, and there's a great pair of books, and I could reverse engineer it, but it's $40, so so I use it. I only teach this every couple of years. So I don't think it's impossible to do, but I haven't done it yet. Yeah, but all my surveys, kind of all the things the courses that I developed myself. This was one of the ones I inherited from the person that I took over from. And actually I taught it my very first semester. It was crazy. So Yeah, but no, there's nothing, there's no constraint other than kind of time.
You're running out of time. Right?
You can go, go ahead. We can have one more, please.
I wanted to put, you've talked a lot about OER. And this is a really good example of this Women in World History one, where you're like, well, the book's not that much, compared to $250 textbook. If we're gonna do it, let's do it where those textbook costs are expensive. But
Right.
when I see, obviously I've taught similar courses to that, and I think can envision a moment sometime if I were teaching again where I could really double down on integration of library provided databases,
Mhm.
in D2L. And the reason I'm suggesting this is because you focus so much on developing that narrative in the OER, but I'm wondering whether other approaches to textbook affordability, such as like a really purposeful, deliberate use of specific resources that are available through our databases that are commonly provided, integrated into D2L.
Yeah.
Might not provide that narrative framework that you've talked about, but could provide, a foundation of interesting, relevant,
Mhm.
timely,
Right.
information that the students could be using.
Right, well, and as we were talking about, and at the end of the previous one, as I'm sort of transitioning from, this is the lecture, this is the textbook chapter, and they're all kind of similar, to maybe something where I would handle the narrative in a lecture, and then we would read sources. I mean, this book is actually kind of an anthology of sources. They're not all primary. They're mostly, historians writing about women. As much as possible, they're women historians, but in the early ones, not quite so much. But those could be found elsewhere. They're all very small, right? They're all, it's not like nothing in here would not. If you took this and you just said, I want to use all of these claiming fair use, they're all such small excerpts that you could probably get away with it, right? There's
Someone might not.
you're cringing. What I'm saying is that, for example, there's only one passage from, let me give an example. Nabia Abbott, Aisha, the beloved of Muhammad, right? From 1942. There's about a full page from that source. Right.
In the guideline, one chapter or under 10%, so.
Well, this is one page. This is one page from. No, this is what I'm saying is this source, Nabia Abbott, is one page from this book, from pages 158 to 161. It's just an excerpt of that from a book that was published in 1942. There are a couple of hundred of these little one-page blurbs. This is an anthology of just these tiny little portions. I wouldn't say go and grab steal these from the Hugheses,
Yeah.
but you could easily find a source that talked about Cleopatra, right, and use a very, very small piece of it with a frame around it that that the OER producer would provide, and I can see that being completely legal and legitimate. And then also, once you get to the, like my conundrum with US history too, once you get to the present or, the last 50 years or so, you've got all these other sources, right? You've got audio and video and just all kinds of different things that you can, that you can kind of pull into these kinds of anthologies. So, yeah, I think it's definitely doable. It would take some effort. It would take somebody who was really devoted to, who is doing this on a really regular basis and committed to this.
Or in some cases, that might be available as an ebook with unlimited simultaneous users, so
Mhm.
it could be
Yeah.
an easy fix.
Right.
It's when like that really restrictive publishers that we run into.
Right. Yeah, I'm always amazed. I mean, we've got such a tiny little JSTOR subscription up at BSU that I'm always amazed about with all of the all the monographs that are actually available if you've got the right subscription.
All right. Well, I hate to close the conversation, but please reach out to any of us if you have questions or want to continue the conversation. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you very much to Dan.
Thank you, Dana.